Hello, and thanks for joining me again on the Sunday Night Poem with Joe. Now, next week we're going to feature a poem by Oscar Wilde, but tonight we're off to Canada and we're going to do a poem by the wonderful Robert Service, the Canadian poet. He wasn't actually born in Canada, he was born in England, Preston, England, but moved to Canada as a young man and stayed there the rest of his life. This was way back in the time of the gold rush up north, the Yukon gold rush. Where there was the Yukon River flows along between Canada and Alaska, and they found gold all along there. And so there was a massive gold rush. There was people coming to there from all over the world to make their fortune. And Robert Service was a young man. He had no intention of going up getting his hands dirty. He was a bank clerk, and he reasoned that they would, if they're going to be making all this money, they'll need somebody to help them count it. So that's where I come in, fair enough. And off he went up to Dawson City. And he wasn't interested at all in drink. But every night he'd go down the saloon and he'd listen to the stories of the miners and their tales and their hopes and dreams of striking it rich. And he'd be writing down frantically. He'd go back to his little cabin, he had a typewriter. And he'd write this brilliant verse and stories. He'd send them off down to America and sell them to newspapers and magazines. And of course they loved it down there because people that didn't dare go up and brave those sub-zero temperatures were getting a real clear picture. He was like a war correspondent, but let's say a goldfields correspondent, painting the picture, showing them what it was like up there in these stories and verse. Robert Service. There was this one poem he wrote called The Cremation of Sam McGee, and we're going to do that tonight. It's one of the funniest things I've heard in verse ever. And the backstory quickly was there's these two lads heading for the goldfields. They've got a team of huskies and a sled, and they're heading along minus 40, minus 50 degrees. And one of them wouldn't stop whinging. He was complaining all the time. He hated the cold so much. And then one day he realized he was starting to die. And he turned to his friend and he said, "I don't think I'm going to make it. I think I'll die." He said, "If I do, will you promise me one thing? Please promise me that you'll cremate my last remains. Don't leave me up here for all time because I'll never decompose. And I hate this place more than any place on earth. Promise me." And so he promised him. Of course, that night he died. And the next day, he loaded him on the sled and away he goes. And then as time went by, he was stuck with this promise given. There was a wonderful line in it. "A promise made is a debt unpaid." Isn't it a great line? So he was stuck with, he was a decent fellow, he had given his word and he was going to honour it. But where could he cremate him with mountains of snow and ice all around? He was stuck. Now, he was badly stuck. And the food was getting low and he was getting really quite mad and delirious, but he was going to keep his word to Sam McGee. Finally, he got to Lake Labarge. I know where Lake Labarge is because I've been there. It's between Whitehorse, Yukon and Dawson City on the right hand side. And he went down to the lake and he saw jammed in the ice an old steamship. And he looked at it and he saw it had a boiler room and means for getting a fire going. And he thought, this is my opportunity to fulfill my promise to my friend Sam McGee. And so this is the poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. Here we go. Hope I remember it. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold, and the Arctic trails have their secret tales that'd make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam McGee. Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, and he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of the cold through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we closed and the lashes froze, and sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars o'erhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me, and Cap says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking you, won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no, and then he says with a sort of moan, it's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet it ain't being dead is my awful dread, but the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. Well, a pal's last need is a thing to heed, and I swore that I would not fail. And we started on at the streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He was crouched in the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee, and before nightfall a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, so I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true. Now it's up to you to cremate my last remains. Well, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. And the long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows. But oh God, how I loathed that thing. And day after day the quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. But on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low, and the trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in, and I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it heartened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, and I saw it as thrice. It was called the Alice May. I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum, and then here, says I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor and lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around and heaped the fuel higher. Well, the furnace roared and the flames just soared, such a blaze you seldom see. And then I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal and I stuffed in Sam McGee. And I made a hike, 'cause I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. Well, I don't know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear. But the stars came out and danced about. Ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peek inside. I guess he's cooked. And it's time I looked, and the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile, you could see a mile, and he said, please, can you shut the door? It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. There's strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold, on the Arctic trails of their secret tales that'd make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge when I cremated Sam McGee. The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service from about 120 or 130 years ago. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Sunday Night Poem with Joe. I'll see you next week. Be kind, be safe.